Hello subscribers and people in the cheap seats. Today I'm going to review the new D&D board game, The Temple of Elemental Evil. This is going to be a review of the miniatures themselves because I'm a D&D player and I buy these for the miniatures. So you'll find out what's in the box and whether the miniatures are any good. What you won't find is a review of the game itself. Plenty of people do reviews for that, and I don't think I'm the best person for it. So, the miniatures. The miniatures come unpainted. I've painted all of these up already, so you're going to see them in their sort of finished form, as it were. And I've not used the scenery from the game itself. I've used my own scenery because, well, it looks a lot prettier. And as I say, I'm a D&D player, not a board game player. So I'm going to start with the one that they actually list on when you're looking to buy the game. It's got a black dragon. Now, the black dragon. I love it because it's a flying dragon. So many games, or so many dragon models, the dragons are on the ground. And this is the first time I've come across a dragon that's actually flying. So that's fantastic. It did, when it came, the tail was bent forward. So I straightened it up a bit. Unfortunately, overnight it seems to have gone back some other way, but not as pliable as bones. It's a harder plastic, but it did work. As miniatures go, it was very easy to paint. This is just, the plastic itself was black, so I just gave it a quick coat of black paint, because you can always tell an unpainted surface, so quick coat of black, dry brush, and then I just did the face. So that came out well. However, I do have one problem with it, and that's its size. If we compare that to the dragon from the Wrath of Ashardalon, we can clearly see the Wrath of Ashardalon dragon is much bigger. Much bigger. Same with the Dracolich. The Dracolich has a similar kind of bulk to the Wrath of Ashardalon dragon. Now you could argue that those are ancient dragons, and that the black dragon's an adult, but I've never been particularly... to me, these aren't big enough to be ancient dragons. I prefer to use this, which isn't a D&D miniature at all. But that to me is an ancient dragon, you know, a truly big, epic beast. So you could argue, well, maybe it's a young dragon. When we compare the black dragon to the younger dragons from the other games, what we see is this is the shadow dragon, and as you can see, the body on the shadow dragon's a little bit smaller. Here is the zombie dragon, and the body size is about the same, but the wings on the zombie dragon much, much smaller. And just as a comparison to a Reaper Bones fire dragon or young fire dragon, which I've painted up here as a rust dragon, that always scares the players. The body on the Reaper model is a bit smaller, and of course the wings much smaller. So scale-wise, it's sort of in between a young and an adult dragon. That to me is a little bit of a disadvantage, because it just doesn't quite fit. You could argue, okay, yeah, maybe black dragons are a bit smaller than red dragons, but there's quite a bulk difference from a dragon like this to a dragon like this. However, the fact that it's flying, for me, totally makes up for it. I love the fact that it's a flying dragon, because every other dragon's always on the ground, and that's a really cool thing. You get 5 heroes in the box. You get a Nemestra, the sun wizard elf, and you get Talon, the human ranger. You get Rat Shadow, the Lightfoot halfling rogue. Barrowin, the gold dwarf cleric. And Aleiros, the human fighter. Now, when I look at these miniatures, I don't quite see what Wizards of the Coast apparently saw. If we compare the halfling to halfling from one of the other games, this one's a bit more portly. This is a halfling from Reaper Bones. To me, this character could easily be a gnome, a deep gnome or something. The human fighter, this to me is a Goliath. This is a human from one of the other games. And here's a Reaper Bones ranger. This guy is a bit bigger. Mind you, these are both female characters, but he is a bit bigger, and he could easily pass, in my mind, as a Goliath. So one of the new races from the Player's Companion. the gold dwarf. I don't really know what a gold dwarf is, but this is a dwarf from another game. This is a much thinner dwarf. But to me, it's nice to see a dwarf with a warhammer. I mean, it's one of the two big racial weapons for dwarves, but so many miniatures for dwarves have axes rather than hammers. This is actually a cleric in Ravenloft, I believe, and he's carrying a wand. But it's so good to get a miniature with a warhammer, so I do like that one. The ranger could easily double as an elf, whichever you prefer, really. And then the elf wizard, again, could easily double as a human. Nice that she's casting a fire spell there. So that's pretty cool. Nice collection of heroes. Then we get on to the monsters. So you get 3 hobgoblins. Now these are really easy to paint because they're basically just metal all over, with just hands, face and hair coloured differently. Yeah, a good useful monster to have. When compared to the orcs in previous games, there's an orc smasher, I think they called it. So it is a bit smaller. This is an orc shaman. Again, you know, the head is a bit smaller, and this is an orc archer. And, you know, again, the orcs from Wizards of the Coast have bigger heads, basically. But I paint all of mine up as essentially as Uruk-hai. So these are some Uruk-hai models, and as you can see, the Wizards of the Coast ones are a bit bigger. I think these are Games Workshop, but yeah, so I think, yeah, he is a bit bigger, a little more bulk to him than the GW miniatures. Now the next miniatures are the Nulls, and these surprise me because these are big miniatures. Just to put that into context, this is one of the hero models. The Nulls, really big characters, and I was surprised by that because in my mind, Nulls have always been a sort of low-level creature that you come across at the start of the game. You know, when you start adventuring, and I never imagined them to be this size. Here, so this is the original D&D board game, and those Nulls are much smaller. I'm afraid these were painted quite a few years ago, so they're not that good by comparison. But this one, I quite like the model. It's got a really good characterful face. I was able to do the speckled back next to the mane, and put some sort of leather bindings around him that just, you know, you paint them black, they easily dry brush and out they come. And then I did the sash in a different colour, and that looks quite good. So the good models, you get 3 of those in the set. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to reconcile the size of them in my own D&D games. Whether that means I'll do some kind of special thing with Nulls, making them much more powerful or something, or making these guys Null champions in front of my other Nulls. But I think they're really cool models, and I really like them. Just, again, I'm not so sure about the scale. Now, in the board game, you get 4 sets of cultists, fire, earth, air and water. And I believe they come around twice. You get the standard ones, and then later on you get empowered fire cultists, empowered water cultists. I decided to paint mine up as genasi. So these are my water genasi. And I kind of did the the swords. I thought were a bit like a swordfish bill. So I kind of, you know, figured I'd sort of paint them up like that. And of course, being water genasi, I've given them blue skin. Now, the water elemental is quite interesting. It's very different to the water elemental in the Legend of Drizzt game. Now, I haven't varnished this yet, so it's not got the same gloss finish that I tend to put on my water creatures. But it's a very different style. I've always thought the Legend of Drizzt one was a bit cartoony. So I like this style, only it doesn't have a face of any kind, which is unusual in the elementals. Usually you get some kind of visible face. I suppose you could argue you've got an eye, and a mouth down here or something, but so I suppose you could say that's sort of a face, but it kind of just feels like a column of blue. It's very, very different model. You do get one each of all the elementals, and I'll talk more about these models later, but the water and the earth elemental are very much small, and the fire and the air elemental are large elementals, I suppose. Well, these by scale to the other miniatures, they're mediums. In the board game, however, they're not considered like that at all. They're just considered to be air elemental, water elemental, and so forth. And when it comes to the fire creatures, you get a lot more of them in the set. You get 3 of these fire bats. It's quite nice. I've always wanted some little bat-like creatures. At some point, I do plan to get a whole batch of Sturges. I've done my fire cultists again as Genasi, although there's very little flesh showing on these guys because they're wearing this big, heavy suit of armour, which I decided to paint in black rather than silver. And get an actual fire salamander, which is pretty cool, because I don't think salamanders are used enough. I have 3 cold salamander models, so it's nice to get a fire salamander. That's a really cool model. He counts as one of the big villains in the game. And then we get a fire elemental. Now this fire elemental is very different to other fire elemental models I've seen. So this is a Reaper fire elemental, and as you can see, this is a very, very different style. They're completely different in their approach. This looks much more like it's sort of molten lava and it's got rock in there, whereas this is pure flame. So my painting, obviously, when I painted them, I tried to reflect that to make this feel like it's something out of Mount Vesuvius, whereas this is just the raw flame of the plane of fire. And then we get on to the Earth Cultists. These guys, well, they're wearing a big heavy suit of plate mail, and then they've got a spiked club, so it's quite odd as a weapon combination. I mean, if you see somebody in full plate mail, you kind of expect them to have a decent weapon. Again, I've painted these up as Genasi, not that you can really tell because so little flesh is actually showing. And then there's the Earth Elemental, and in my mind, this is a bit like the old Water Elemental. It's a bit sort of cartoony. It's got these big sort of oversized hands and that funny kind of Pokemon type thing behind his head. Paints up okay though. I mean, it's a medium elemental compared to a Reaper Bones Earth Elemental, however, and you can see the difference. I mean, the Reaper one really does look like it's rocks and gems, and it's got the sort of fossil in his back, and big difference. But then again, you could always say this is your large elemental, this is a medium, because elementals in D&D do come in different sizes. Which brings us to the element of air. Now I have to say, when it came to these guys, again I painted them as Genasi, but because they were air, I kind of thought, air, well, they should have stormtroopers. So I've kind of painted them up a bit like stormtroopers, which, it amuses me. What my players think of it, we'll find out. These are the air cultists, armed with crossbows. In the board game, they claim these are blinding crossbows. I'm not quite sure how they justify that kind of logic, but anyway, they are my stormtroopers. And then we get the air elemental. And I really like this model. I think it really kind of works. You've got the cloud forming, the whirlwind, and I think that's a really, really nice sculpt. From there we come around to the Etin. And this isn't a miniature, this is a bigature. So Etin, of course, a 2-headed giant. Not the brightest things, they tend to use simple weapons. And it's a big old model. Fairly easy to paint because it is just mostly flesh, so I just did a flesh colour, bit of dry brush, and then tucked an ink wash over and let that do the rest. It's got some nice details, but arguably you could go painting tattoos and stuff. It is, as I say, a big model. I mean, this is a Reaper Bones Etin. I just kept them side by side. You can see that the Wizards of the Coast one is much, much larger. So there's quite a big difference there. But I personally wouldn't have trouble using these together. This is a younger Etin. Doesn't even need reduced stats, really. It just, it is what it is. Not everyone's the same. So, I like the model. Much easier to paint than the
the Reaper one, although that's possibly because I put more effort into the face on the Reaper one. So I've put my bugbears on Mother Dearest here. These are a lovely model, and I love the faces. It's got some nice, a nice expression, and very quick and easy model to paint. You know, just one colour over all the fur, paint up some armour bits and a few spikes, and then it's just onto the face. So it's a nice model, actually. There's a sash as well, but it's a nice model. Again, when I go back to the model from the old D&D board game, the old bugbear seems to have a little more bulk to it than this guy, and a bit more of a hunchback. Probably a bit smaller, really, because of the way this guy's head comes forward rather than up, which the new ones do as well, but not to such a profound way as the old ones. But all the same, I think they're great models, much better than the old ones. They look great. There's 3 of those, and like there is for most of the monsters, they're basically the character monsters you get 1 of, and then anything else you invariably get 3 of. And then from our bugbears, we come round to the troglodytes. And these are cool little things. They're just a sort of low-level monster. They're just a low-level monster, and you know, very quick and easy to paint. I tend to use a yellow dry brush on these rather than a white. That tends to bring them out quite nice. Kind of thing you throw at players in hordes. When compared to other miniatures, I've got some Grenadiers models here. This is kind of like a Grenadier crocodile man. So slightly different style, but sort of comparable in bulk. Then I've got a Grenadier lizard man. As you can see, the lizard man, which I'm working on at the moment, hence the base isn't painted or finished sculpting, but the Grenadier lizard man, much bigger than the troglodyte. Go through to something I never thought I'd see a model of, which is doppelgangers. Because usually with a doppelganger you just use an equivalent model to what the player already has. These are quite cool minis, because, you know, I tried, from memory, I thought doppelgangers were meant to be grey in their natural form. I think I'm right on that, not brown. But the way that these are modeled, and like the hands, they're kind of like a cross between a ghoul and the Silence from Doctor Who. So they've got these really big hands. So they're quite a characterful little thing. So yeah, I quite like those. I think they're a good addition. Overall then, it's a great selection of models. To get roughly 40 odd for between £35 and £45 makes them fantastic value for money. There's some excellent sculpts. There isn't a model that I think, oh, that's appalling, possible exception of the Earth Elemental. They're all, you know, good models. They've got good character. There's, you know, interesting artistic take on the Fire Elemental. There is one model actually that I think I should mention. The Hobgoblin, the way they've done the feet, it's almost like he's standing on those geisha shoes, you know, like he's on platform heels or something. And, you know, if you were going to sculpt the base, then you could just sort of blend that into the ground, because it's not where his feet is, it's the base is lifted up, and that's kind of odd, because the base is lifted up just under his feet, so, you know, it's like his toes are touching the floor and his heels are up in the air, except the base rises up underneath. So yeah, it's that is a little peculiar on the Hobgoblin. But aside from that, you know, I think it's a great set. The Cultists are interesting. You know, a nice take on having NPCs in your games. The Nulls are a beautiful model. A little confused by the scale, but I think it does really work for them, even if I might now be using Nulls against high-level adventurers with modified stats. I really like the Bugbears. I think they've got a lot of character to them. It's cool to have some doppelganger models. You can never have enough elementals. The Yetin's fantastic and towering size. Really love having a fire salamander. The firebats are cool. The heroes are good. The dragon, as I said earlier, scale could be adjusted a bit, but it's brilliant that, you know, having a dragon on a flight base is is a really cool thing indeed. So really looking forward to getting them in my adventures. I think they're great models.